My name is Milan Petrov, and the day of my grandfather's will reading was the day my life broke in two. I walked into that cold, echoing conference room with more nerves than I'd ever admit. Roman, my older brother, sat there in his tailored suit, legs crossed, oozing the confidence of a man who always expected to win. I used to think we were close once, when we were kids, building forts in the yard, dreaming of futures that felt equally bright. But somewhere along the way, he learned how to step on my shoulders to climb higher, while I was still stuck thinking we were supposed to help each other. The lawyer read the will like it was a grocery list, his tone flat, his eyes never meeting mine. Roman got exactly what we all expected, a sleek, three-room apartment in the heart of the capital. Newly renovated, prime location, probably worth more than I'd earn in a decade. I tried to feel happy for him, but all I could do was stare at the polished table and feel the shame burn my neck. I'd always been second best, even in the eyes of the man who'd taught me to read. When it came to me, the lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and then delivered the final blow. Milan Petrov, you inherit the property at 12, Lesnaya Street, Solnishko. He might as well have handed me a one-way ticket to nowhere. I saw the smirk flicker across Roman's lips, the same one he'd worn when he beat me at chess and told me to try harder next time. I didn't even know where Solnishko was. The name sounded like a joke, some forgotten village with cracked roads and more ghosts than people. The lawyer handed me the envelope with the key inside like it was a punishment. I clenched it in my palm, the brass teeth digging into my skin. My eyes darted around the room, but no one met my gaze. When the reading was over, Roman swaggered over, clapping me on the shoulder with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Tough break, little brother, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Guess Grandpa wanted to teach you a lesson about hard work. He leaned in, his breath a mix of mint and arrogance. Maybe you'll finally grow up out there. Talia was waiting outside, arms folded, her lips a thin line of impatience. She'd always been beautiful in that cold, untouchable way, like a marble statue I could never warm. She barely waited for the lawyer's door to click shut before she turned on me. A house in a dead village, she hissed, her eyes blazing with disappointment. What are you going to do with that, Milan? Plant potatoes? Sell honey on the roadside? I opened my mouth, but no words came. The key felt heavy in my pocket, like a stone I couldn't throw away. I tried to picture what the house even looked like, dusty, broken, crawling with spiders. I thought of the apartment Roman would walk into that night, glass windows, new appliances, a view of the city skyline. My chest burned. Talia shook her head, her voice low and sharp. You're a loser. You always have been. The words hit me harder than any punch. They settled into my bones, made themselves at home. You know what, Milan? Just get out. I don't want to look at you tonight. It wasn't even dark yet, but the sky felt like it was closing in. I stumbled toward the street, my head spinning. Every step felt like a betrayal, of the promises we'd made, of the man I'd tried to be. I thought of the years I'd spent working late shifts, doing everything I could to give Talia the life she said she wanted. But the truth was, it was never enough. I was never enough. I heard the door slam behind me. That final, heavy sound felt like the end of a chapter one hadn't realized I'd been writing. I stood there, numb, my breath forming small clouds in the evening air. The city bustled around me, cars honking, people laughing, neon signs flickering, but I felt like I was watching it all through thick glass. The key in my pocket pulsed like a secret waiting to be told. In that moment, I realized the life I'd known was gone. Talia's voice still echoed in my head, every syllable a cut. Roman's smirk lingered in my memory like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I was alone, stripped of the safety net I'd clung to, forced to face the world without the crutch of my old life. Maybe that's why I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. Maybe that's why I didn't call Roman to demand an explanation or beg Talia to let me in. Instead, I turned my face toward the darkness and started walking. The key in my pocket felt like a question. Who was I without them? Who was I without the life I'd built around being the second son, the quiet husband, the shadow in someone else's story? I didn't have answers. Only the cold certainty that everything had changed. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something I hadn't yet learned to want. I packed what little I had and left the city without looking back. The bus station smelled like cheap coffee and wet cement, the overhead speakers buzzing with half-hearted announcements. My duffel bag was light, too light, like the life I'd built in the city had already been slipping through my fingers. The bus driver barely glanced at my ticket, his eyes glazed from too many hours on the road. I sank into a cracked vinyl seat and stared at the window as the bus pulled away, the city's skyline shrinking behind me like a fading promise. Talia's words kept looping in my head. You're dragging me down. Roman is building empires, and you're still reading books. The way she'd said it, like my love for stories, for history, for old things, was a weakness instead of a strength. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up late, reading by the glow of a desk lamp, trying to understand the world through someone else's words. Maybe that was my problem. I'd spent too long living in the margins of other people's stories. The bus hummed across a landscape that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. Flat, gray fields rolled on for miles. Faded houses, their paint peeling like old bandages, leaned under the weight of too many winters. Rusted tractors sat like abandoned toys. The occasional billboard advertised cheap beer or the promise of a better life somewhere else. I wondered how many people had left Solnishko, seeking something brighter in the city. I wondered if any of them had found it. I shifted in my seat, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. My reflection stared back at me, hollow eyes, unshaven jaw, a man who didn't look like he belonged anywhere. I tried to remember the last time I'd really smiled. Not the polite, paper-thin smile I gave Roman or Talia when they expected it, but a real one that started in my chest and spread to my face. It felt like a memory from another life. The bus rattled over a pothole, jolting me upright. I clutched the duffel bag like it held something precious, but all it carried were worn clothes and a notebook I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. The pages were filled with scribbles, half-finished stories, quotes from books, and notes from conversations I'd overheard and never found the courage to speak aloud. A record of the man I'd been trying to be. Or maybe the man I was too afraid to let out. As we got closer to Solnishko, the landscape changed. The fields gave way to clusters of birch trees, their white bark stark against the glow. The road narrowed, a single-lane strip of cracked asphalt bordered by ditches filled with rainwater. Every mile felt like a step deeper into a forgotten world. I wondered what the house would look like. Would it even have a roof? Would the windows be shattered? Would the ghosts of the past greet me at the door? The bus slowed, and the driver grunted something that might have been the village's name. I stood, my legs stiff, and shuffled down the aisle. As I stepped off, the smell of wet earth and wood smoke hit me, grounding me in a way the city never had. I watched the bus pull away, leaving a plume of exhaust that hung in the air like a goodbye. There was no one waiting for me. No sign with my name on it. Just a dirt path that led away from the bus stop and into the trees. I stood there for a long time, duffel bag at my feet, listening to the wind rustle the branches. The air felt different here, thicker, older, like it carried the weight of every story that had ever been told in this place. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, arguments, whispered secrets. My grandfather's voice, low and patient, telling me about the world he'd seen with his own eyes. I wondered if he'd walked this same path, carrying his own doubts and hopes in a bag slung over his shoulder. I took a deep breath and started down the path. The mud sucked at my shoes, leaving dark prints behind me. I thought about Talia again, her voice sharp as broken glass. You're a loser. You always have been. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd never been the man she'd wanted me to be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking towards something that was mine. Not borrowed from Roman, not polished for Talia, but something that had waited just for me. The path twisted through the trees, leading me deeper into the heart of the village. I saw old wooden houses leaning at odd angles, their porches sagging under the weight of years. Windows stared at me like tired eyes. A few curtains twitched as I passed, the inhabitants curious or suspicious, I couldn't tell which. No one came out to greet me, but I didn't mind. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to find out what this place had to say to me. Finally, I saw it. The house. My house. It squatted at the end of the lane like a forgotten memory. 2 stories, a sloped roof with missing shingles, and a fence half swallowed by weeds. The windows were streaked with grime, and the paint had peeled so badly it looked like a sick animal's skin. But still, it stood, waiting, just like my grandfather had written in his letter. I dropped the duffel bag at the gate and stared at the house. A part of me wanted to laugh. What kind of man leaves his grandson a ruin? But another part of me felt a tremor of gratitude. This wasn't a gift in the shape of a house. It was a challenge. A question. Who are you, Milan? What do you have to offer? I stepped forward and pushed open the gate. It groaned on rusty hinges, protesting every inch of movement. The path to the front door was overgrown with weeds and dandelions, but I walked it anyway. Each step felt like I was stepping into the life I was meant to live. And even though I didn't have answers, even though the air smelled of old wood and rain and ghosts, I felt something crack open inside me. Maybe this was exile. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of freedom. The house sat hunched behind overgrown hedges, its roof sagging, shutters broken like cracked eyelets. I stopped at the edge of the yard, my boots sinking into the damp earth. A cold wind rattled the broken shutters, making them sound like old bones chattering in the dark. I gripped the handle of my duffel bag, the fabric worn thin from years of half-hearted travel, and took a step closer. Every footfall felt like stepping into a different century, a different life. I reached the porch and paused, my heart pounding. I'd spent the entire bus ride imagining this place as a ruin, but even ruins can carry a kind of dignity. The boards creaked under my weight as I climbed the steps, each one groaning as if it hadn't felt a foot in decades. The door was painted a dull green once, but now the paint peeled away like an old scab. I touched the handle, cold, metal, a relic from some forgotten craftsman, and turned it. The door swung open with a sigh. Inside, the air smelled of old pine, dust, and something warmer, like a memory of laughter left behind. A single shaft of light sliced through the gloom from a crack in the curtains, illuminating a swirl of dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. I stepped over the threshold and felt the house breathe around me. Every wall, every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper, "Welcome back." I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and took a slow turn, letting my eyes adjust. The furniture, though worn, was intact. A threadbare sofa slouched in the living room, its cushions slumped like a tired man's shoulders. A wooden table bore the scars of countless dinners and arguments, though it darkened in places by what might have been spilled wine or candle wax. It was the kind of place where memories were built and broken, where a family's laughter and anger and love clung to the walls like smoke. I ran my fingers across the mantelpiece, feeling the grooves and scratches. A faded photograph of my grandfather rested there, the glass cracked but the image still strong. His eyes, fierce and kind all at once, seemed to follow me as I moved. I remembered him sitting on a bench in the city park, telling me stories about the war, about the old days when honor meant something. He'd always had that smell, tobacco and pine resin, like the woods themselves had claimed him as one of their own. I let my fingers drift from the mantel to the bookshelf that lined the far wall. At first, it looked like any old shelf, filled with dog-eared novels and cheap paperbacks. But then I saw it, a seam in the wall that didn't quite fit, a line that ran too straight, too precise. I leaned in, my breath catching. It was like the house itself was keeping a secret. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached out and pressed the seam, half expecting it to vanish like a trick of the light. But the panel shifted under my touch, a faint click echoing in the silent room. I pushed again, harder this time, and the hidden door creaked open on rusty hinges. Behind it was a small passage, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. My pulse quickened as I ducked inside. The air changed as I stepped into the hidden space. It felt thicker, charged with something electric. I could smell old paper and leather, the scent of time itself. I reached out and flicked on the single bulb overhead, its glow struggling against the darkness. And then I saw it. Books. Not a couple of dusty volumes on a forgotten shelf, but a library. Floor to ceiling, every wall lined with shelves, each one packed with books in every size and language. Latin, Greek, Russian, even Arabic. Some had leather bindings so old they looked ready to crumble at a touch. Others gleamed with gold-embossed titles that made me catch my breath. My grandfather had built this, hidden it, preserved it. I reached out and ran my fingers along the spines like I was touching ghosts. Titles I hadn't seen in years leapt out at me, histories of the old empire, collections of poetry, treatises on philosophy and science. Every subject that had fascinated me as a boy was here, waiting. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride, maybe, or purpose. A part of me that had been sleeping all these years woke up in that room, stretching its limbs and remembering who I was. In the corner, half hidden behind an old map of the Carpathians, I saw something that made my breath hitch, a steel safe, big and imposing, its door gleaming dully in the weak light. I stepped closer, my hand trembling. My mind raced with questions. What could my grandfather have locked away in there? More books? Old money? Secrets? I reached out and traced the edges of the safe's door, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips. A combination dial waited, silent and patient. I knew Roman's birthday by heart, Talia's too. But would that be the key? Or was it something only I would know? I leaned my forehead against the safe for a moment, letting the cold sink into my skin. The house felt alive, watching me, waiting for my next move. I pulled back and took a step away, the bulb overhead flickering like it couldn't make up its mind whether to shine or die. The library, the safe, the books, they were all pieces of a puzzle my grandfather had left for me. And I realized, standing there in the dim light, that he hadn't left me a burden. He'd left me an inheritance of questions, a legacy of curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to write my own story. I turned off the light and let the door swing shut behind me. The seam clicked back into place, hiding the library from the world once more. I felt a shiver run through me as I stepped back into the living room, the photograph of my grandfather watching from the mantel. "All right," I whispered. "Let's see what you were trying to tell me." Behind the false wall was a library. Not a couple of dusty books on a shelf, a library. My grandfather had been a collector, an archivist, maybe even a hoarder, but in that small, hidden room, he was something more, a preserver of secrets. I felt like I'd stumbled into a cathedral built from paper and ink. The air itself seemed charged, like it hummed with stories waiting to be told. I took a tentative step inside, the floorboards protesting under my weight. The scent hit me first, old leather, the sharp tang of ancient glue, the soft musk of aging paper. My grandfather's scent. I remembered him reading to me as a child, his voice deep and patient. Those stories had taught me to dream, to believe in the power of words. And now, here I was, surrounded by his legacy. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each one lined with spines in every language I could think of, and some I couldn't. Latin titles winked at me like old friends. Russian history stared at me solemnly. Arabic scrolls rested in delicate boxes. My fingers traced the edges, absorbing the weight of their age. It was like touching ghosts, my grandfather's and my own. I let my eyes drift across the titles, and something inside me ached. I thought of Roman, how he'd have laughed at this place. Books, he'd sneer. What are you going to do with books? You can't eat them. You can't sell them. But Roman never understood that some things weren't measured in rubles or square meters. Some things had a value that couldn't be sold or traded, only lived. In the corner of the library, half shrouded in shadow, I noticed a steel safe. Big. Heavy. Its surface was cold and unyielding. A combination dial sat like a judge waiting to decide my fate. I reached out and laid my hand on it, the metal biting into my palm. I tried to imagine what he'd hidden there. Money? Family documents? A final letter? My mind raced with possibilities, each one a key that might open the door to something I'd never understood. I turned away for a moment and let my eyes wander back to the books. My grandfather's passion burned from every shelf. There were tomes on Slavic mythology, treatises on philosophy, and even a collection of love letters, bound in red leather with a gold clasp, like a secret waiting to be told. I pulled one book down at random, The History of the Petrov Family. My name. Our story. I sat down on the cold wooden floor and opened it, the pages whispering as they turned. There were black and white photographs pasted between chapters, my grandfather in a soldier's uniform, standing beside a tank, my great-grandmother in a headscarf, her eyes proud and tired. Each page felt like an invitation into a world I'd never really known. I realized how little I'd asked him about his past, always too busy with my own small worries to listen to the man who'd come before me. Guilt, heavy and sour, settled in my stomach. The library felt like a confession and a challenge all at once. My grandfather had spent his life collecting these stories, these pieces of who we were. And he'd hidden them away, waiting for the one person who'd bother to look. This house isn't broken, he'd written. It's waiting. I finally understood. It wasn't just waiting for repairs or a fresh coat of paint. It was waiting for me to wake up. I set the family history book aside and pulled another from the shelf, a collection of letters tied with a green ribbon. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words still carried weight. I read the first line, "To my beloved," whose voice I still hear in the wind. My grandfather had loved someone, deeply, fiercely, and here it was, hidden behind a false wall, waiting for someone to care. I thought of Talia and how quickly she'd walked away when the money ran dry. I wondered if I'd ever known love like that. I leaned back against the shelf, the smell of old paper filling my lungs. The walls of the library seemed to close in on me, wrapping me in the warmth of generations. I wasn't just Milan Petrov, the man with the broken marriage and the failed city life. I was a Petrov, grandson of a man who'd survived wars, who'd built a life from nothing, who'd found love in the midst of chaos and held onto it with both hands. I turned back to the safe, its steel door glinting in the dim light. My grandfather had left me this room, this library, and this final mystery. I felt the weight of it like a stone in my chest. Whatever was inside that safe, it was meant for me. Not Roman, not Talia. Me. I knelt before it, running my fingers over the dial, each number cold and sharp under my skin. I tried Roman's birthday. Nothing. Talia's. Still nothing. Then I tried mine. A quiet click, like the safe was sighing in relief. The door groaned open, revealing a trove of letters, deeds, antique catalogs, and a thick envelope marked, "For Milan, and Milan only." I lifted it with trembling hands. My name, in my grandfather's steady script, stared back at me. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. I sat back on the floor, the envelope heavy in my hands, and closed my eyes. The air around me felt alive, buzzing with anticipation. When I finally opened the envelope, the pages inside felt warm, like they'd been waiting for my touch. His words were careful, deliberate, and full of a kind of love I'd forgotten could exist. He told me why Roman got the apartment and I got the house. Roman, he wrote, had lost his roots, always chasing status and praise. But I, Milan, had always asked about the past, about the stories that made us who we were. This house isn't broken, he reminded me again. It's waiting. I let the letter fall into my lap and looked around the library. The shelves, the books, the dust, all of it felt like a map he'd drawn for me. A map to find myself. I realized then that I wasn't just here to inherit a house. I was here to inherit a legacy. And for the first time in years, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. I stared at the envelope in my hand. The paper yellowed at the edges, like it had aged along with my grandfather. I turned it over, tracing the way he'd written my name, Milan, not Misha, not Petrov, just Milan. Like he was speaking directly to the man I'd always wanted to be, not the man I'd let the world reduce me to. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open, the paper crackling like dry leaves. Inside, the letter was long, written in my grandfather's strong, deliberate script. He started by telling me how proud he was of me, not because I'd made a fortune or a name, but because I'd always asked questions. "You never took anything at face value," he wrote. "Even as a boy, you wanted to know why. That's rare, Milan. That's a gift." I felt tears sting my eyes. When was the last time someone told me I was good at something that wasn't measured in bank accounts or promotions? Talia had called me a dreamer like it was a curse. Roman had rolled his eyes whenever I brought up the past. But here was my grandfather, reminding me that curiosity wasn't weakness, it was strength. He explained why he'd left Roman the apartment. "Your brother needs walls to hide behind," he wrote. "He needs windows to show off. You need roots. You need history. You need the stories that make a man." I folded the letter against my chest and let the words sink in. All those years I'd thought I'd come second. Maybe I'd been first all along, in the only way that mattered. The safe held more than just the letter. There were deeds to the property, old receipts for repairs, notes written in the margins of books about the village, plans he'd made, questions he'd asked, just like me. It felt like finding a secret conversation between us, one that had been waiting for me to continue. A conversation that told me I wasn't alone, even now. I leaned against the safe, the cold steel pressing into my back. My mind churned with everything he'd written. "This house isn't broken," he'd said. "It's waiting." Waiting for what? For me to come back and find myself again? For me to prove to the world, and to myself, that I wasn't the failure Talia had painted me to be? A noise startled me. A floorboard creaking overhead. I froze, my pulse pounding. I listened for a moment, but the silence settled back in like a heavy blanket. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Maybe it was just the house shifting, stretching its bones after so many years of neglect. Or maybe it was my grandfather's spirit, watching over me. I found comfort in that thought. I gathered the documents, tucking them carefully into a canvas bag I'd brought with me. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but they felt too precious to leave behind. As I turned to leave the library, I paused at the threshold and looked back one last time. The books, the maps, the stories, they were part of me now. I closed the hidden door and heard the click as it locked back into place, like a promise that it would still be there when I needed it. I carried the bag upstairs and set it on the kitchen table. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small window streaked with years of grime. I pulled out the letter and read it again, slower this time. Every word felt like a lifeline. My grandfather had trusted me with this place, with its secrets. He trusted me to honor the past while building something new. I made myself a cup of tea, weak and bitter, but it was something warm. I stared at the steam curling up, thinking about what came next. I could sell the house, walk away, and start over somewhere else. Roman would probably love that. He'd swoop in and buy it up for cheap, add it to his growing list of conquests. But my grandfather hadn't left it to Roman. He'd left it to me. That meant something. I thought about the way the village had looked when I'd arrived, tired and slumped, like an old man waiting for the end. But there'd been a spark, too, in the way the wind rattled the trees and the smell of wood smoke. A spark that said maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the house and the village were waiting for someone to remember them. I set my cup down and opened the old receipts. They told a story of repairs half finished, of plans interrupted by sickness or politics or bad luck. My grandfather had tried to keep the place alive, even when the world had started to forget. I felt a pang of guilt. I'd forgotten, too. But I could remember now. I could pick up where he left off. I pulled out a pen and a notebook and started making a list. Roof repairs, shutters, windows, a new coat of paint. It was a long list, and I had no idea how I'd pay for it all. But as I wrote, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix things. I wasn't waiting for Talia to approve or Roman to help. I was making my own plan, my own future. I heard the wind pick up outside, rattling the branches against the windows. I thought of my grandfather sitting here, pen in hand, making his own lists. The thought made me smile. Maybe he'd felt the same stubborn hope I felt now. Maybe he'd known that even when everything looked broken, there was always a way forward if you cared enough to try. I read his letter one last time before carefully folding it and placing it in the safe. Then I locked it, listening to the satisfying click that felt like closure. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. This house isn't broken. It's waiting. And now, I was ready to answer that call. As I stood there in the quiet, I realized that I wasn't just holding a letter. I was holding a torch, a chance to bring light back to a place that had gone dark. And maybe, just maybe, to a part of myself that I'd thought was lost forever. I decided not to sell it, not to run. I was going to restore this place, rebuild it with my own hands, or at least find someone who could. The idea rooted itself in my mind like an old oak, steady, unyielding. I'd spent my life chasing approval, waiting for someone else to define me. Talia, Roman, even my grandfather, in his quiet way. But this time, it would be me who decided what mattered. The next morning, I walked into the village square, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The place was as tired as I remembered, shops with faded signs, shutters that hadn't been opened in weeks, and faces lined with suspicion and resignation. I felt their eyes on me, weighing me, measuring me. The outsider who'd come back to claim a piece of a place they'd given up on. I found Gregor near the well, his gnarled hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. He'd been the village's caretaker, in his own way, for longer than anyone could remember. His eyes narrowed as I approached, but there was a softness there too, a hint of the man who'd bounced me on his knee when I was a boy. Gregor, I said, my voice steady. I need your help. He looked at me over the rim of his mug. With what, Milan? I took a breath. The house. I want to fix it. Restore it. I can't do it alone. He snorted, a sound like dry leaves. That old place? It's falling apart. Takes more than paint and nails to make her stand again. I know, I said, but I have to try. Something shifted in his eyes then, a flicker of respect, maybe even hope. You're your grandfather's boy, all right, he muttered. He gestured for me to sit. Tell me what you need. We sat on a splintered bench, the morning sun creeping over the rooftops. I told him about the roof, the shutters, the windows that rattled in the wind. I told him about the books and the safe, and the way the house had felt like it was waiting for me. Gregor listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the horizon like he was seeing the past layered over the present. When I finished, he nodded once, slow and deliberate. You need Ilya, he said. He's the only one who can do justice to that house. Ilya? I repeated. The name was unfamiliar, but it felt like a key turning in a lock. He's a restorer. From the next town over. Has hands that can make old things new again. Gregor's eyes met mine. Your grandfather trusted him. That's saying something. Hope sparked in my chest. Can you bring him here? Gregor shrugged. I can ask. No promises. That's all I need, I said. I reached out and shook his hand, feeling the roughness of his skin, the years of hard work etched into every line. Thank you. He grunted, but there was a smile hiding in the corners of his mouth. Don't thank me yet, boy. This house, It's not just a building. It's memory. It's blood and sweat. If you want to bring it back, you'd better be ready to give it everything. I am, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. 2 days later, Gregor arrived at my doorstep with Ilya in tow. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a lean build and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His hands were long and scarred, like they'd shaped 1,000 things and broken 1,000 more. He walked around the house in silence, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood, the cracks in the plaster, the way the roof sagged like a tired old man. When he came back to where I stood, he crossed his arms and studied me. "Your grandfather built this right," he said at last. "She just needs a reason to stand again." I felt a weight lift off my chest. "Can you help me?" He nodded once. "I can help, but you have to understand, this isn't about making it look new. It's about making it live again." "I know," I said. "I want to honor what he built." His gaze softened. "Then we're in agreement." We spent hours going over the house, room by room. Ilya pointed out the beams that needed reinforcing, the windows that could be salvaged, the floors that would have to come up and be laid anew. He spoke of the house like it was a living thing, like every board and nail had a story to tell. As he talked, I felt a kind of excitement I hadn't known in years. Each problem wasn't an obstacle. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every crack in the wall felt like a challenge. Every creak of the floor a reminder that this place had survived too much to give up now. We made lists. Supplies. Tools. Time frames. It was overwhelming, but it felt right. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Ilya. I had Gregor. And, in a way, I had my grandfather, his presence lingering in every shadow, every scent of old wood and pine resin. That night, I sat by the fireplace with the safe open beside me, the letter from my grandfather resting on my knee. The wind rattled the shutters, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt like the house was clearing its throat, getting ready to speak. I ran my fingers over the paper, reading his words again and again. This house isn't broken. It's waiting. I thought of Talia, her sharp words and sharper exit. I thought of Roman, his smug grin and the way he'd always treated me like an afterthought. And I thought of myself, the man I'd been and the man I was becoming. A man who wasn't afraid to build something from the ground up. A man who was ready to fight for the things that mattered. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls. I leaned back in my chair and let the warmth soak into my bones. Outside, the night stretched its long fingers across the village, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt ready. This house, it wasn't just a roof and walls. It was history. It was legacy. And now, it was mine to protect, to rebuild, to make whole again. I let the fire burn low and closed my eyes, imagining what this place could become. And in that darkness, I saw not just a house reborn, but a man remade, one plank, one nail, one memory at a time. I took pictures of the rarest books and sent them to collectors in St. Petersburg and Warsaw. It felt like a betrayal at first, like I was selling off pieces of my grandfather's soul. But I needed money, and the house needed saving. I couldn't fix the roof with sentiment. I couldn't patch the walls with memories. I needed cash, and the books were the only thing of value I had left. Ilya understood. He never judged me for the calls I made or the buyers I met. He'd watch me pack the books carefully into crates, his hands steady but his eyes sad. "Your grandfather would have done the same," he said one evening, his voice low and certain. "He wanted this place to live. If that means letting go of some of the past, so be it." I nodded, but my heart still clenched every time I parted with one of those volumes. Each one carried a story, a lesson, a fragment of who I'd been. But I had to remind myself that the house was the real inheritance, the bones that held the memories together. Without it, all those books would just be paper in the wind. Casper Voss arrived 2 days after my first email. He was older than I'd expected, tall and stooped, with thin hair the color of old straw. His eyes, though, were sharp as broken glass. He carried a leather satchel, scuffed and battered, but his hands were delicate, like a surgeon's. He barely spoke as he flipped through the books I'd laid out on the dining room table. He examined each one like a jeweler inspecting gems, turning them over with reverence and a hint of greed. Every so often, he'd nod to himself and make a note in his little black notebook. When he picked up a small, leather-bound book with gold filigree on the spine, his face changed. He ran his fingers across the cover, his breath catching. "This," he whispered, "this alone could buy you a small house in the capital." I felt a jolt of excitement and dread all at once. What is it? An original print from the 17th century, he said, his voice hushed like a prayer. Russian, with notes in the margins by a royal scribe. A piece of history, my friend. My chest tightened. I thought of my grandfather, carefully cataloging every book in this library, preserving the stories that had survived wars, revolutions, and decades of indifference. Selling this felt like erasing a piece of him. But I remembered his words, this house isn't broken. It's waiting. And I knew what he meant. He trusted me to choose what mattered most. Casper looked at me, his eyes glinting. Name your price. I hesitated. Every cell in my body screamed at me to hold on, to protect this treasure. But the roof leaked. The walls cracked. The house needed to stand before the stories inside it could breathe again. 5 million rubles, I said, my voice steady. His eyebrows shot up. A high price, but fair. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. He opened his satchel, pulled out a checkbook, and started writing. I watched the pen move across the paper, each stroke a door closing on the past and opening on the future. When he handed me the check, it felt heavy in my hand. You've made the right choice, he said. This book will be cared for. Displayed in a museum, perhaps. It deserves to be seen. I nodded. Thank you. After he left, I sat at the table and stared at the check. 5 million rubles. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. Enough to fix the roof, the shutters, the floors. Enough to bring this house back to life. Ilya found me there, the letter from my grandfather still on the table beside me. He glanced at the check, then at me. It's not easy, is it? I shook my head. It feels like losing a part of him. But you're giving life to the rest of it, he said. You're choosing what to save. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Choosing what to save. That's what my grandfather had done, over and over, in every line he'd written, every book he'd collected. And now it was my turn. The next day, I called the carpenter. I called the roofer. I called every man in the village who'd ever held a hammer or a paintbrush. I told them we were bringing the house back to life. Some came out of curiosity, others because they owed my grandfather a favor. A few just came because they wanted to see if the crazy city boy could really pull it off. I watched them work, watched Ilya guide them with quiet authority. He taught them how to handle the old wood, how to strip the rot without tearing away the history. Every beam, every plank was a piece of my grandfather's story, and Ilya treated it like it was his own. At night, I sat by the fireplace with the safe open beside me. The letter was always there, a reminder of the man who believed in me. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the shutters, I thought I heard his voice, soft, patient, urging me on. I sent more books to Casper over the next few weeks, each one harder to part with than the last. But with every check he handed me, the house grew stronger. The roof stopped leaking. The windows stopped rattling. The walls stood firm against the wind. And slowly, so did I. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ilya stood beside me on the front porch. The house behind us glowed in the fading light, its windows like warm eyes watching over the village. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I hope so. He would, Ilya said. You're not just restoring a house. You're restoring a legacy. I let the words settle in my chest, feeling the truth of them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't second best. I wasn't Roman's shadow or Talia's burden. I was Milan Petrov, guardian of the stories, the house, the family. And I was right where I was meant to be. Roman called me one evening, his voice dripping with that mix of forced politeness and hidden envy I'd come to know so well. I was in the middle of sanding a beam on the second floor, the old wood giving off a smell that reminded me of every summer I'd spent here with my grandfather. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart tightening at the sound of my brother's voice. Hey, little brother, he began, stretching the words like he was testing them. Listen, I've been thinking. I leaned back, wiping sweat from my brow at the back of my hand. About what? The will, he said, and I could almost hear him shifting in his leather chair in the city apartment that had been gifted to him like a trophy. Maybe it wasn't fair. Maybe we should trade. You give me the house. I give you the apartment. Think about it. A place in the capital, brand new appliances, a view of the skyline. You be set. I stared at the floorboards, a soft smile forming on my lips. He didn't understand. He'd never understand. Roman, I said, my voice steady, this place has roots. Stories. It has me in it. I'm not trading that for high-rise loneliness. He scoffed. You've always been sentimental, Milan. You think the past matters, but it doesn't. The future is in the city, in the deals you make, in the people you know. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. For so long, I'd let them define me. But now? Now I had something he'd never have. Maybe you're right, I said. But I don't care. This house, it's where I belong. His silence crackled on the line, and for a moment, I thought he might say something real, something human. But then he laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. Suit yourself, little brother. Just don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. I hung up before he could finish. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling lighter than I had in years. Roman couldn't touch me here. Talia couldn't reach me with her sharp tongue. This house, this village, it was mine, and it was enough. Ilya found me on the porch later, the sunset painting the sky in streaks of gold and red. That was your brother, wasn't it? He asked, his voice calm, like he'd been expecting this moment. Yeah, I said. He wanted to trade. The apartment for the house. Ilya snorted. He doesn't understand. No, I agreed, a slow smile spreading across my face. He doesn't. We sat there for a while, the two of us silent in the growing darkness. The house creaked around us, the wind rattling the shutters like an old friend. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing approval, trying to be someone I wasn't. Roman had always been the golden boy, the one who knew how to charm a room, the one who got the applause. But out here, in this place, that didn't matter. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he'd built this house with his own hands, about the library he'd hidden behind the false wall. I thought about the letter he'd left me, the way he'd known me better than I'd known myself. I felt his presence in the wood, in the books, in the very air I breathed. And I knew he'd chosen me for this place because he trusted me to see its worth. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth and let its warmth fill the room. The flames danced across the walls, casting shadows that looked like memories. I imagined my grandfather sitting here, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea, telling me stories of the old days. I could almost hear his voice, deep and patient, reminding me that the past wasn't a chain but a foundation. I let that thought settle in my chest, a quiet comfort. The next morning, I met Ilya in the yard. He was already at work, his hands moving over the frame of a window that had seen better days. He glanced up at me and nodded. Ready to get your hands dirty? I smiled, rolling up my sleeves. Always. We worked side by side, tearing away rot and replacing it with new wood, sanding rough edges, fitting glass panes. Every stroke of the hammer felt like a declaration. I belonged here. Ilya taught me to read the grain of the wood, to listen to the way it spoke when you pressed your palm against it. He showed me how to coax life back into something everyone else thought was too far gone. As the days passed, the house began to change. The roof no longer sagged. The walls stood tall and proud. The windows shone with new glass, reflecting the sky. I'd walk through the rooms at night, running my fingers along the door frames, feeling the strength in the beams. Ilya was right. This house wasn't just a structure. It was a living thing, and every repair was a promise to the past. One evening, after the day's work was done, I found myself back in the library. The safe sat open beside me, the letter from my grandfather resting on my lap. I read it again, every word sinking deeper into my bones. You need roots, he'd written. You need stories. I thought of Roman's offer, of the city apartment with its shiny appliances and empty hallways. It would have been easier in some ways. No rotting wood, no creaking floors. But it wouldn't have been mine. It wouldn't have been home. I heard Ilya's footsteps in the hall and looked up to see him standing in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me with that quiet, knowing look he always had. You're thinking too hard, he said. I chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally thinking about the right things. He nodded, pushing himself off the doorframe. You've got a good thing here, Milan. Don't let anyone tell you different. Thanks, I said, my throat tight. I'd never been good at accepting compliments, but Ilya's words felt honest, earned. He turned to leave, but paused. Your brother, he'll come back. Men like him always do. I met his gaze, steady and calm. Let him. He can't take this from me. Ilya smiled, a small, proud curve of his lips. Good. After he left, I sat in the library, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought of all the stories the walls held, all the laughter and tears and whispered secrets. I thought of my grandfather, of the trust he'd placed in me. I felt his pride, like a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I closed the safe and stood, feeling stronger than I had in years. Roman could keep his apartment. Talia could chase her ambitions. I had this house, this legacy, this life. and I was done apologizing for it. As I stepped out into the night, the stars overhead shone like tiny promises. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the voices of the past. And I knew I was right where I needed to be. In the safe were old photographs, tucked between letters like silent witnesses to a life I'd never fully known. I lifted them one by one, each a window into a moment that felt more real than the years I'd wasted trying to be someone else. Me, as a boy, perched on my grandfather's knee in that very library, his eyes crinkled with laughter, mine wide and trusting. Another showed him standing on the front porch, hammer in hand, the house behind him a work in progress, just like me. I spread the photos across the desk, the wood warm under my palms. Each image told a story I'd almost forgotten. My grandfather's smile, the way he'd looked at the house like it was a living thing. I saw my younger self too, nose in a book, oblivious to the world. Talia had always said I was too serious, too quiet. Roman had called me a bore. But here, in these photographs, I saw a boy who'd been proud of his curiosity, who had believed in the power of stories. That boy felt closer now than he had in years. I found original certificates for the books I'd been selling, proof of their provenance, stamps from royal collections, handwritten notes in the margins. I thought I was letting go of the past by selling them. Now I realized I was saving it, giving the stories new life in places they'd never been. My grandfather would have understood that. He'd have known that sometimes saving something means setting it free. Tucked at the bottom of the safe was a small box, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. My hands trembled as I untied the knot. Inside, I found a ring, simple gold, worn smooth by time, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the fragile edges. It was a letter from my grandfather. This was my father's. It began. The ink faded, but the words steady. He wore it every day, through war and famine and the long nights that followed. He believed it carried the strength of every Petrov before him. Now it's yours. Wear it when you need to remember who you are. I held the ring in my palm, its weight more than just metal. It was a promise, a legacy. I slipped it on my finger and felt a warmth spread through me, a connection to the men who'd come before me. My father, his father, and now me. A line that wouldn't be broken. I packed the letters, the photographs, the ring back into the safe. The house creaked around me, as if it approved. Every wall, every floorboard seemed to sigh with relief. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was here, right where I was meant to be. Ilya found me in the library, my hands still resting on the safe's edge. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice low with respect. "Proof," I said. "Proof that my grandfather didn't just leave me a house. He left me a legacy." Ilya nodded, his eyes kind. "Then let's make sure it stands." We worked through the night, patching cracks in the walls, oiling the hinges that had grown stiff with neglect. Ilya's hands were steady, every movement a quiet testament to his craft. I followed his lead, learning the language of the house, the creak of old wood, the sigh of settling dust, the way the wind slipped through the eaves like a whispered prayer. As dawn broke, I stood by the window, the light painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. I thought of Roman, his voice always sharp with ambition, always trying to drag me into his world. I thought of Talia, her laughter like glass shattering in my ear. And I thought of myself, the man I'd become, the man I was becoming. A man who knew that roots mattered, that stories were worth saving. I opened the window, letting the cool morning air wash over me. The village stirred to life. Roosters crowing, smoke rising from chimneys. The world felt bigger and smaller all at once. Ilya came to stand beside me, his presence steady and sure. "You've changed," he said, his gaze on the horizon. I met his eyes, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "So has this house." He nodded. "That's how it works. When you restore something, you restore yourself too." I thought about that as I watched the sun rise. This house, this village, this life, I was part of it now. Not as a visitor or an intruder, but as a caretaker, a guardian. The man my grandfather had trusted me to be. That afternoon, I gathered the villagers in the yard. Gregor stood by my side, his gnarled hands resting on his cane. Faces I'd only glimpsed through curtains now watched me with open curiosity. I told them about the house, how it wasn't just mine, but theirs too. How every beam, every nail carried their history, their laughter, their tears. I told them about the library, the safe, the books that had left, and the ones that would stay. And I told them about the ring on my finger, the promise I'd made to the past. Some of them nodded, their eyes shining. Others looked away, uncertainty written in the lines of their faces. But I saw a spark there too, a glimmer of hope. A chance to believe in something bigger than the slow decay of forgotten dreams. Gregor stepped forward, his voice strong despite his age. "This house was always the heart of this village," he said. "Your grandfather knew that. Now you know it too. We stand with you, Milan." The words hit me like a blessing. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I nodded, my throat tight. "Thank you," I managed. "All of you." That night, I sat by the fireplace, the ring glinting in the firelight. I held the safety in my hand, feeling its cool weight. The house hummed around me, alive with stories I hadn't yet discovered. I thought of my grandfather's letter, his belief in me. I thought of the boy I'd been, the man I'd become, and the man I was still becoming. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the voices of the past. I listened, my heart open, my spirit strong. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't lost. I was Milan Petrov, reader, restorer, guardian of memory. And I was exactly where I was meant to be. The day I realized I'd finally won, the sky was the color of Margot's favorite sweater, a soft blue, the kind that made her eyes sparkle. I sat on the porch swing, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's yard, and let the weight of the pasture sink in. Travis and Claire had tried to shrink me. They tried to twist my love for them into something ugly, tried to make me believe I was less than the man I'd always been. For a while, they'd almost succeeded. I'd let their words echo in my chest like an apology I didn't owe. I'd believed I was a burden, that my years of sacrifice and devotion somehow didn't count anymore. But now, sitting here with the quiet sun on my face and a cup of coffee in my hand, I knew better. I wasn't a burden. I never had been. I thought back to that cold basement in Claire's house, the thin rug on the concrete floor, the padlocked pantry. I could still feel the ache in my knees from standing too long, the sting of her voice telling me I wasn't a guest. I was a burden. That word had haunted me, had chased me into my sleep. But I carried something else now too, Elijah's binder, filled with proof that I'd never deserved the way they treated me. The court had agreed. The bank had agreed. Even the damn bird on my welcome mat had agreed in its own way. Now I carried that binder like a shield. A reminder that standing up for yourself sometimes means standing alone. But I learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I remembered Janelle and the boys, Silas and Micah. How they taught me that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, it's the people who sit with you when the world is loud and you're too tired to speak. Janelle's eyes had held no judgment when I told her the truth, only gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing someone finally sees you. When I signed the deed to the duplex over to her, I'd felt like I was planting something, like Margot's garden all over again. Something that would grow long after I was gone. I'd left behind the courtroom battles, the small wars of whispered accusations, and come here, to this town where the neighbors waved from their porches and the cashier at the market called me Mr. T, like I was someone worth knowing. I'd found a place where my name wasn't a burden to anyone. I remembered the first time I walked into the VFW hall here. The walls were lined with photos of men and women in uniform, some of them smiling, some of them not. I'd sat at a table with a group of veterans who'd seen their own share of battles, some on foreign soil, some in their own living rooms. They'd nodded when I told my story, their eyes sharp with understanding. "Happens more than you think," one of them had said. "Family can be the hardest enemy to fight." We'd laughed then, the kind of laughter that tastes like freedom. I'd gone home that night feeling lighter, like I'd left something behind on that table. A piece of the guilt, maybe. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the world turned the color of old photographs, I sat on my porch swing and thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I thought about Margot, about the way she used to lean her head on my shoulder during Sunday morning coffee. I thought about the slippers by the bed, the small things that had made our life a home. I missed her every day, but I'd learned that missing someone didn't mean you had to stop living. A knock on the fence broke my thoughts. I looked up and saw Ruth from the animal shelter waving, Buster the mutt beside her. "Hey, Tom," she called. "Buster's been asking about you." I grinned. "Has he now?" She laughed. "You know dogs. They know who's got a kind heart." I stood and walked over, Buster's tail wagging like he hadn't seen me in years. He pressed his nose to my leg and gave me that look, the one that said I was someone worth trusting. "You want to take him for a walk?" Ruth asked. "Yeah," I said. "I like that." We walked down the road, the sun painting the pavement gold. Buster pulled at the leash, eager to chase every squirrel he saw. I laughed, a real laugh. the kind that starts in your chest and feels like a gift. As we reached the end of the block, I saw a small girl with a pink backpack skipping rope in her driveway. She paused when she saw me and waved shyly. I waved back, and her smile lit up the evening like a porch light. I felt something settle in me then, a quiet joy, the kind Margot always talked about. I'd spent too many years thinking that joy was a gift other people gave you, that it came with an invitation, a seat at someone else's table. But now I knew. Joy was something you built for yourself, even if it started with nothing more than a dog on a leash and a neighbor's wave. I thought of Claire then, not with anger, but with a sad sort of acceptance. I hoped she'd find her way, that one day she'd remember the man who taught her to ride a bike and stayed up late fixing her science projects. I hoped she'd learn that love wasn't a ledger you balanced at the end of each month. But whether she did or didn't, it didn't define me anymore. I was more than the names they'd called me, more than the locks on the fridge, more than the burden they'd tried to make me carry. I was a husband, a father, a soldier, a man who'd fought his own war and won. Buster barked, pulling me out of my thoughts. I bent down and scratched behind his ears, feeling the roughness of his fur. "Come on, buddy," I said. "Let's go home." We walked back to the house, the porch swing waiting like an old friend. I knew I'd sit there tonight, sip my coffee, and talk to Margot under the stars. I'd tell her I was okay, that I'd found my own peace. And I'd tell her, softly but firmly, that I'd never be a burden again. Not to anyone. Because I'd remembered who I was, and I wasn't about to forget it now.